Bigger than capes.
Give me some sadness.
Yeah, I was looking forward to it, and then I watched it.
Oh, dry.
Hello, and welcome to Bigger Than Capes. Today, we are lucky enough to be joined by an author who has written many, many things, most notably Star Wars, Doctor Who, Warhammer, things that we don't cover on Bigger Than Capes as a podcast. But he's also written some indie stuff, which is hopefully what we're going to be talking about today. So hello to Cavan Scott. Hello.
Hi there, how are you doing?
All right. You are heavy with the cold, but
I am. So I apologise to anyone who's listening to this. I sound like I'm gargling gravel, but I'll try not to aspire halfway through the interview. Although that would, make headlines.
It would. I mean, get some hits. So our standard first question, which we ask everybody, is how did you get into comics specifically, as a reader and also as a writer?
From a reading point of view, it was growing up in the late 70s and early 80s and being obsessed with things like the Beano and the Dandy and Nutty and Whizzer and Chips, the sort of humour comics that we used to get here in the UK every week, just full of a lot of slapstick humour. And from there, I sort of graduated. Actually, what am I talking about? I still read them until I was in my now. I graduated in 2000 AD, Marvel UK titles, there were many. And so that was my way into finding comic shops. And from there, I just became a lifelong fan. And for writing, I'd been working on Doctor Who for a few years. This was before the show came back. I was working for Big Finish, a company that does audio dramas, and got a little bit of work off the back of that for some Doctor Who comics. And so, that was my way into writing as well.
Was it similar with the books? Was that how you got into writing books and other such things, or did that come as a separate thing?
Well, because I was a journalist. I was a magazine journalist, working for a company called Future Publishing in the 90s on things like SFX magazine. And from meeting people through that, I was around when Big Finish Productions, who do audio dramas, started to do the Doctor Who range. And so I pitched for that. And so that was the first sort of writing work I'd done. I've been writing what we now call fan fiction for years and sending it off to fanzines of various ilks, whether that's Doctor Who, Star Wars, Star Trek, or comic stuff. And so wanted to make the jump. So and the Doctor Who, it was a time where they didn't know Doctor Who was coming back. I think the BBC honestly believed it never would, and so it was a good time to jump into it. And so when the show came back and was the massive hit that again no one really expected it to be, they needed people who were sort of steeped in writing Doctor Who at the time, and so that's where it came from. And over time, I sort of like phased out my magazine work and started doing more and more audio book and comic work.
Excellent. Just a quick question: Beano or Dandy?
Oh, I was Beano through and
Which
through.
Was your preference?
Yeah, Beano. It was and Nutty. Nutty was I used to love Nutty, which will mean nothing to vast majority of people listening. But it was where Banana Man was first from, and I mean, years later, I ended up writing for both the Beano and the Dandy, which is a lifelong ambition, tick, and ended up writing Banana Man, so it sort of went a bit full circle there. But and also things like Whizzer and Chips and Topper and Buster, I begged, borrowed, and stole to try and get as many as I could, and because at the time everyone got different things. So I was a Beano fan and a Nutty fan. My next door neighbour, you got the Dandy and Whizzer and Chips, so we used to read each other's, and used to say at school they used to swap them around. I mean, so it was a massive thing, and it's just such a shame they don't all exist now. I mean, the Beano's literally the last one standing, and a sort of Dandy annual every year. So it's a big tradition that we've lost, and I think we're worse for it, for getting kids into reading comics.
Yeah, I have to agree, because I started off with the Beano.
Hmm.
That was my way in. So, Shadow Service.
Yes.
I can't remember how many issues we've had now. Is it 15?
We're on 15 now. Yes.
I have.
Yeah.
So it started back in 2020 by my research. I can't remember that far away. Where did the initial idea, because it's been described as spycraft meets witchcraft, which was one description.
Yeah. Black Ops,
where
Black
did that
Ops
initial
meets
idea
Black Magic. I think it was just sort of the inside of my head, because I grew up, I say, around that time, growing up in Britain, being a lad, I was obsessed with James Bond. I loved Doctor Who, and I loved the side of Doctor Who, which was, for anyone who's watched it, UNIT, which was the group of people, the military, who was sort of like fighting the alien invasions. Because of Doctor Who, I was massively into monsters. That led me into Hammer, which led me into Universal, which led me to Stephen King, and led me into horror in general. So for years, I used to try and write these stories about this group called MI666, who were a supernatural spy service protecting Great Britain from demons and monsters. And they had short stories that appeared in really obscure little anthologies, and I just tried to keep this going and to build it, and it never really clicked. It never really worked. And then I was talking to Vault Comics, to Adrian, at Vault Comics at a Comic Con in San Diego a few years ago now, and he was saying, it was a lovely moment. He said, "We'd love to work with you. Have you got anything you could pitch?" And my brain went completely blank. And then suddenly in the back of my brain, there was MI666. And so I went, Tinker Tailor Soldier Witch. And he went, "What's that?" And I went, "I have absolutely no idea." And I sort of like span this bit of thing about, what I've been doing. And he said, "Well, that sounds really interesting. Go away and come up with a pitch." And what I did was I pulled lots of the elements from these stories that I've been writing and put in the pitch, but I still didn't really I couldn't make it work. And so what I needed was a lead character, and it was the lead character that we came up with for the series, Gina, who is a witch, who is basically someone who is very alone, thinks she's one of the only people in the world who can use magic, and she gets recruited for the Shadow Service for MI666. And that was when it all gelled. That's when it came together, because I think I was trying to write a story about a pre-existing group of characters. They've been working together as a team, and of course you need that way in, and you need that. And I've always liked in spy stories the person who gets tapped on the shoulder and by someone from the Secret Service saying, "Come and work for us." So yeah, that was it really, and so it was one of the quickest commissions I think I've ever had, because as soon as I put it to Adrian, he was like, "I love it, we've got to do it." So I was like, "Yes, thank you very much." But I don't think even then I didn't explain to him the gestation period and how long it actually take to get to that point. But sometimes that's what the best ideas take time, and you've got to find the right moment, and it was definitely the right moment then.
That was it. So obviously you've had it in your head for a long time. You've got two good on. You've got Corinne Howell and Triona Farrell on the art. How much does the art that they come up with, how does it match what's been in your head?
Oh, it's improved things immensely. It absolutely has pushed things on. So I knew Corinne. I'd worked with Corinne, but never actually met her. So I'd worked her on a Star Wars comic. Quite often, you write scripts and an artist draws them, and you're in different continents. You never get a chance to really meet or talk. Sometimes it often goes through the editor with some of the bigger companies. And so I knew Corinne through that. We'd worked on a Han Solo story together. And Adrian was the one who suggested her. And he'd been wanting to work with her, and he thought it would be a good fit. And as soon as he said that, a light bulb went on. I was like, yes, because I knew she was a huge horror fan, like me. And so we started to talk about things through. And what happened is that Shadow Service has gone. Even I said I was a big fan of monsters. I never expected to be so many monsters as there are in the final book. But what happened is that Corinne is incredible at designing creatures and monsters and demons and that kind of thing. But then also she kept putting stuff in the background, which was just spectacular. So she started to put these statues of these weird angelic angels, angelic skeletons in the back with big swords, and I kept saying to her, "What are these things?" And she was like, "Well, I don't know. They're just there." And it was like in a lot of the buildings where I-666 operate, these statues are there. And we have a central character called Hex, who's like the M character, the spy master, who's a very old being, very old soul trapped in the body of a sort of a 10-year-old, a quite evil 10-year-old. He's affectionately known as the little shit between us who work on the comic. And whenever he was there, she started to put these angels in, and it was one of those brilliant moments because I knew that actually there would be angels playing in the story moving forward, but I hadn't really considered how they looked or how they would be involved. And it tied together, and it meant that we could expand that entire mythos, which was something just Corinne added to try and get some atmosphere in the book. So there's been loads of those cases, things that she's drawn that I've been able to pick up and go, oh, that solves a plot point later on, or that's something we get a different angle we can take it. As I said, there are far more demons in it now, physical manifestations of demons, just because I saw how much fun Corinne was having drawing them, and I loved what she was coming up with.
You have to say her demon designs are
Incredible.
excellent. They are really, really good. And the world has expanded out a bit. We've also lost some characters along the way, in some ways or another. How do you sort of decide? You're like, yes, this character does need to die, or, maybe we'll let this one live.
I'm getting a reputation for killing characters. It's something that I get a reputation for in my Star Wars work quite a lot. And it isn't something I do on a whim. And so I don't want to give too many spoilers just in case you haven't picked up the book, and everyone should. It's very good.
Yeah.
But yeah, some characters, one character was destined to die always. And they had a very, purposeful shelf life in the story because it plays into the wider story. And another of the major characters died because when I was working out the story, it suddenly realized that it was the way it had to go. And I think you don't do these kind of things just for, I don't. You don't do it just for shock value, but sometimes the story you go in such a way. And I know exactly where Shadow Service ends, but I've given myself the freedom to explore the characters as we get there. And so, and one of them I honestly thought was going to be right to the end. And then I suddenly realized as I was plotting out one of the arcs, I was like, yeah, they're not going to make it, are they? And there is an element, you want to create a world where all bets are off. Any kind of super secret agent work is dangerous, especially if you're in this kind of this heightened reality that MI666 operate in. And again, I wanted to give that idea that, not everyone is going to make it through, because that's the reality of the situation in this very, strange, twisted, demonic world. So yeah, it's always an interesting thing when you kill off a character, and there's one in particular, the last major character who died, I really struggled with, because I wasn't ready for them to go, but it told me that it was probably right, because if I was grieving them, then hopefully the readers would too, and more importantly, the other characters would. And I think that's why you do it. When you're creating a world like this, where you do have deaths, because they have to mean something for the other characters, and it has to change their trajectory. I'm not talking about fridging a character just because you want to make someone angry and I will go and take revenge and I will find you and da 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 da. But I know you don't really talk about Star Wars, but in the big Star Wars project I'm working on, the High Republic, it's become known now, we killed off a character we expected to see through to the end of the project, after a long conversation, because we suddenly realized what it would do to the other characters in a way of, it would complete their story in a very different way, and their presence would actually be felt more with them not being there. And so you look at all those kind of things before you work out if you're going to give someone the old heave ho.
No, I mean, I have mourned characters in Shadow Service, so that's worked. That's worked.
Yeah. There was one point, because Corinne didn't know about the first major death on the team. I didn't tell her until she got the script, and she was bereft she was absolutely bereft, and she was like, "Well, how can we find? We've got to get them back." And I was like, "No, that's it's who knows with these characters." But I've largely tried to get to the idea that if someone goes, they've gone. It's not gonna, it's not a world where people get resurrected left, right, and centre. We're not going to pull a Spock, and because again, it has to mean something. It has to be real. You can't just have a you've killed Kenny moment. But yeah, that was a shock for her when she was reading that issue, and I got lots of messages that day, lots.
I can imagine. You have talked about exactly how it's going to end. You've planned it out, because it has expanded out quite a lot from how we started. Just Gina on her own running around the streets. How long did it take you to sort of plot it all out? Was it things have changed as you've gone on, or do you know the definite ending?
I know the definite ending, and most things like this, whether it's my own stuff or an IP work, I usually write the end. So I've written the last page of Shadow Service, so I know where I'm going, and that's my North Star. And so, but things have developed and changed because we're a team, and I think that's the most important part. Because conversations we've had with our first editor Tay, and then Adrian, who's come on to edit it in recent years. Between Corin and myself and the other members of the team, we've discussed things, and and I think that's really important in a comic, especially in a creator owned, because everyone has to have some ownership in it, and so always knowing where we're going is important. But yeah, there are moments where we've had conversations and Corin said, I'm not sure I'm comfortable with that storyline, or I'm not with that outcome with these characters. I think we should be pushing them in this direction. So because it's a partnership, I've taken that on board. But I said the ultimate last image, I know exactly what the last page is, and so I think that's always important to borrow from Doctor Who those fixed points in time that you can't change. But it depends how you get there, and that's how I plan most of these stories, is to give yourself the freedom to explore, and for the characters to grow and the characters to surprise you. Because no matter how much you plan it, no matter how much you outline it out, you can get to a point and it suddenly doesn't seem right anymore. I'm definitely a planner, but I try and build in that space to surprise myself.
Yeah, and it does feel as well like it's a very collaborative comic. Like some comics you read and you think the artist and the writer weren't in touch on this one, but with Shadow Service it definitely does feel like you've all had an input.
Yeah, we have a Slack group, and I mean Corin is scary fast. So because she's in Texas and I'm in Bristol in the UK, so I can go to bed and see a thumbnail of a page. And by the time I'm waking up, there's been pencils and inks. And she's also very quick at putting stuff because there's been moments I've gone, oh no, stop, because we can't do that because in 2 issues we've got to do this. And she's also very good at going, okay, fine, and going back and because the way she works as well, she works digitally and she works on loads of different layers, so we can change things. I'm not making her suddenly redo an entire page from scratch. But yeah, but we've got a Slack group, and so everything is, we see every part of it. So they see various versions of the script. I see all the artwork going through, and we all talk about it. And that's been great. It's been a really, really good way of working. And most of the time with creator, I think you need to do that. Well, again, when you work in IP, you can sometimes write a script, and then for next thing you know, you've got the comic in your hands. That's not the best way of working. I hate working like that, but it happens. And there's stuff that I have when the last thing you say is when you send the script in, and then you say goodbye. I prefer to be more involved, and you can't always get that. But with creator-owned comic, again, that's why we do this, because it is our world. And so, yeah, this one especially, I've wanted it to be really collaborative. Well, all of my creator-owned comics, I've tried to be as collaborative as possible.
Excellent. So we'll switch to another creator-owned comic. Well, sort of. We'll switch to The Ward, if that's
yes.
The trade of which is out this month, I believe.
It is,
4 issues. I've heard this rumor. That I'm going to go with another thing. ER meets Supernatural was a description that I came across.
Yeah.
But it's interesting because I got almost like a Doctor Who vibe from it, in that this is the kind of place the Doctor would show up.
Yeah, it's basically it's not too difficult to get a Doctor Who vibe from any of my stories. And a lot of them are, imagine this, but with monsters. And ER, yeah, it's definitely ER Supernatural, ER Hellboy. I think Dark Horse have promoted it as well because obviously they are the House of Hellboy. It's about a American emergency room that deals exclusively with mythological creatures who live in the sort of sewers and the various places that people can't see in this big American city called Curtin, which is made up. And it was absolutely, my wife is obsessed with things like ER, and there was one program in particular called Code Black, which there's a brilliant documentary called Code Black, which is about the oldest emergency room in the States. It's phenomenal. And also, if you can't take medical programs, it's that you see proper operations happening. It's you have to be able to watch stuff without being squeamish, but it's incredible documentary, and they did a spin-off drama series of it. And I love that one too. But I spent the entire time going, this would be so much better if one of the characters was a Minotaur. And so that's where it came from, really. And there was an amazing episode of Casualty, which is our version of this kind of ER type program, where Colin Baker, Sixth Doctor Who, plays someone who thinks he's an alien. And
I've
again,
seen
that was
episode.
Yeah, and I always thought, well, it wouldn't have been great in the middle of ER if he was an alien, because what if we actually got a crossover with Doctor Who? So the ward is kind of that's where that all comes from. So it's a bunch of, it's exactly what you expect. There's a bunch of people in an ER working hard with so many different species that they have to operate on. And like the Code Black program was talking about, part of the drama and the joy of that program was people having to work side by side on different cases and run from one case to another. And so that's the kind of feel we tried to get with the ward.
Yes, it does feel like it deals in some of those typical medical drama tropes. Was it just fun to subvert them and just do it with monsters?
It was fun. It was really hard because I'm not actually a medically minded man at all. And I did end up watching a lot of medical dramas. I was very lucky that one of my co-writers on Star Wars, Daniel Jose Older, used to be a paramedic. So he was exceptionally good to have around. And also the editor's wife is a doctor. So there's a little the address for the hospital is it's on the corner of both their names. Because they were great, because I was running past. So while I was writing it, I was running past Daniel going, imagine if a Minotaur had come in with his horn missing. What would you call that? It'd be dehorned. Excellent. And what would they perhaps do in that situation if someone lost an arm or a leg or a head? And so that sort of set up the script. And then the editor's wife would read it when I submitted it. And there were a couple of moments she was like, oh no. I mean, but there are, obviously we are dealing with, I've tried to build a bit of folklore in there as well. And so some of the medicines they use, it's a very modern hospital, but some of the medicines are sort of based on folklore as well. So it was that kind of like halfway house of going, it's got to appear realistic. Thankfully, I haven't got to write an episode of ER or Grey's Anatomy and get things right, because that would be hell on toast. You can play a bit with some of the cures because it's magic. But it's magic, medicine and magic, they're the same thing.
They are, ultimately.
Yeah.
No, I think a Minotaur would liven ER up, frankly.
I think it would be. Yeah, and I think that was one of the first. That was the pitch, and it's on the cover of the graphic novel of the trade. The Minotaur was definitely right there, and a gelatinous cube, which I can say when I haven't got a cold, from D&D. I just wanted to get one of those in, because I just thought that'd be a fun thing that they've had to bring in. They've got a rough sleeper who's always getting eaten by these gelatinous cubes, so they have to try and get it out, but without harming the cube. I just thought that was funny. So that's one of the cases that turns up.
Yeah, I have to say it's nice to have that, because there's some serious stuff going on in the ward, but I think it's also nice that you have got those absolutely ridiculous bits of. You've got some humour in there as well. Even the bit where she's trying to deliver the baby in the underground and.
Yeah, so there's a giant couple of giants who live in the sewers, and the giant is very pregnant, the giantess, and a human-sized human has to give birth to this poor, has to aid the birth of this giant. And it's really funny because I've got a friend of mine, George Mann, who I work with, and we work on various things together, and he's got a big thing against giant babies, and I keep putting them in loads of stuff I write. He just doesn't like them, and I wrote an episode of Ghostbusters where there's a giant. An issue of Ghostbusters when there was a giant baby ghost, and he's just like, "You're doing it on purpose now." I was like, "Yes, I absolutely am." So, because again, then they've got to get the baby to the hospital, and no one's supposed to know it's there. It just seemed a funny situation, but also, you're in the middle of it, it must be the most dreadful situation, So, and we do cut away when she has to actually crown the baby, because that would be something that perhaps we had lots of conversations about how much we could show. And what we could do, and because there are various versions of how that scene could run, but I think we chose the tasteful one.
Yeah, it was definitely tasteful. Things possibly slightly less tasteful in some regards. So Dead Seas is the newest of your creator-owned stuff, which has had one issue out. The second is out soon.
Yes.
And I've read various descriptions of how this one goes, all with the meats. Ghostbusters meets the Dirty Dozen, I think, was my favourite description.
Oh, really? I've not heard that one. Okay.
That was one I found. The Poseidon Adventure meets the Haunting of Hill House was the one that cropped up more. But I did come across someone that described it as Ghostbusters meets the Dirty Dozen, which seemed
amazing. I love that. So I mean, again, goes back to my theory of like, if I like something, put monsters in it. So I was a huge fan of 1970s disaster movies, and when we were working on Star Wars: The High Republic, the Poseidon Adventure was one of our keystone movies. We all watched over and over again. We had a group of movies that we'd all watch when we were planning, and again, I was watching it going, obviously, these things have amazing death counts, these films. People die every 5 minutes. What would happen if they were coming back as ghosts immediately? And that's where it came from. And so, so it's an issue. Nick Brokenshire, who's an amazing artist from over here, he's providing the art, and his ghosts are just incredible. We started work on that. I mean, this was pre-pandemic. We started work on Dead Seas, and we just spent a good 6 months just making up ghosts, when we should have really been making up the story, because Nick just kept sending me more and more of the most bizarre, like people with horses' heads and entrails hanging out, and it was just like, where is this coming from? He's like, I don't know, and it's scaring me. And so, and there is a giant baby in it, just I was
gonna say.
Yeah, because I love them. I think giant babies are amazing. There should be more giant babies in fiction. Give me a giant baby.
Giant babies in everything, really.
Yeah. I haven't got a giant baby in Shadow Service yet, but it's only a matter of time.
I was going to say, are we going to expect Gina's going to come across something at some point?
Yeah, it's going to be. I want it to become my trope. That's my little aim in life. There are worse things to want out of your career.
That's what you want to be known for. That's the thing.
Yeah.
Because it does feel like it could be set in the same world as Shadow Service, as The Ward could also be.
Yeah.
Mainly because monsters and ghosts and things.
Yeah, I think the difference with Dead Seas is that everyone knows about everything. So the whole point of Shadow Service and the whole point of The Ward is people keeping things secret. In Dead Seas, ghosts are just there, and everyone has to deal with them every day. So the first issue starts with a girl who's been sent to bed by her parents, and she can't because grandma's back again. And the very dead grandma's coming back to sing lullabies to her granddaughter, because that's what ghosts do. And so, it's a world where it's just the spectres and phantoms of our past just live alongside us all the time.
Which must get really horrific for some people.
Really annoying.
Yeah,
really. I think that's what we try to get across, is that no one's scared of the ghosts anymore. They're just there, and it's just like, oh, for goodness sake, can we just get some peace? And yeah, that's sort of where the story starts from.
Because it's interesting as well, because Dead Seas has a male protagonist, because we have Gus in Dead Seas as opposed to Nat in The Ward and Gina in Shadow Service. How do you make the choice of what gender is going to be the lead character, or is it does it just come naturally?
I think it depends on the thing we said. Dead Seas is about a group of convicts going onto a ship to scrape ectoplasm from the whores, because ectoplasm's really good for you apparently, and more valuable than oil in this world. And we just made the choice very early. It was a bunch of male convicts, so that's why it became Gus. And also, he has a Latin American past, because so does Nick, the artist, and so there was a lot of that in it. With both Shadow Service and Nat, it was only afterwards that I realised that I'd written 2 comics with female leads. It just, they seemed right for the story. And then I've ended up writing a big Star Wars series called The High Republic, which has a female lead. So it's just something I feel quite comfortable. I've got 2 daughters, I live in a house full of women. It's just become part of my life. But yeah, I don't really think about it until afterwards. It only really occurs to me. Because you find the best character for the story, and also the worst character for that story as well. The character is going to struggle the most, and so that's when it sort of comes naturally from that basis.
So, how do you foresee Dead Seas going?
Down. Oh no, because it sinks. It's well, I mean, it's a 6-issue series. Excuse me, and so. After that, it has a very definite end at the end of that 6 issues. I've written it all now. Nick's on issue 5, I think. And but we have obviously talked about how we could do more, excuse me, if the need arises. But for me, Dead Seas is very much a one and done, excuse me. Sorry. That's the spirit of Nick Brokenshire reaching across the ether to say, don't tell people it's finished.
No, I'm doing more of this. How dare you?
I've done designs for 978 ghosts. We need to fill them all. But that's the thing. One thing we don't do in that story is we haven't explained a lot of the backstories of the ghosts, and they've all got them. So that's something we talked about, is finding out more about who these ghosts actually are. So it's definitely a jumping on point for a lot of other stories if there's an appetite for them. For those particular characters, it's their story, but the world has a lot to explore.
Excellent. Right, that's all my questions done.
Brilliant.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I would recommend everyone go and read all those things, because I've enjoyed them immensely. So yes, if you've not read Shadow Service, start the beginning, carry on. The Ward's only 4 issues. It's a mini series. You can read that. And Dead Seas is just started, so it's a good jumping on place.
Good point. Yeah.
Yes, thank you for your time.
Thank you.
And good luck with the rest of it. Good luck with your other stuff as well, your IP related content.
Space wizards and things like that. Yeah, I never get far away from them.
The space wizards are always there.
Yeah. With
the giant babies. There's a crossover.
I mean, to be honest, that one day a giant baby will appear in Star Wars. It'll be a giant Ewok baby. But, now I've got to make that happen.
I'm going to say that's it now. You said it. It's out there. Yeah. No, I would definitely be interested in anything that involves a giant Ewok baby. So there you go. I think there's a market for it. Yeah. There's at least me. Yes. So thank you very much, and I hope that your voice recovers soon.
Thank you. Yes, sorry about the choking and nearly dying there.
That's all right.